Wanted to wish everyone happy holidays and thank you for your continued service on this work group. It's been a couple of months since we've come together, so thanks for sticking with us through this process. Just in terms of the agenda, I think we circulated the minutes from our prior meeting last week. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to take a look at those. We'll first take any amendments to the minutes. Please just let us know if there's anything you'd like to add or correct. And if no edits to the minutes, we'll take a motion to approve the minutes from our October meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Anyone opposed to approving the minutes from our prior meeting? Hearing no objections, the minutes are approved and they will be uploaded to the work group's webpage on the county website. Thank you. Lisa, would you mind pulling up the agenda again? Okay, so just wanted to give a quick idea of what the goal of today's work group meeting is. As you can see, we're going to be focused primarily on the draft of the report, which was circulated earlier today. So I just wanted to get us oriented around that discussion. That's really our only matter of business today. Of course, we'll open it up at the end for any general comments from work group members on anything related to this topic, as well as to address any questions that are submitted by members of the public as well. But really, we're here today to talk about the draft of the work group report. So just wanted to kind of bring everybody up to speed on where we are and where we go from here. So at our last meeting in October, we agreed to a timeline that would allow us to work the various subcommittee recommendations into a cohesive work group report. We agreed that report would be presented to the work group at our December meeting, which is today, and then posted online in January for public review and comment. As discussed at prior meetings, the county conducted a procurement for some technical assistance with the report compilation, just to bring everybody up to speed. As a result of that process, we have retained the assistance of Dr. Tiffany Manuel and her firm, the Casemate, to assist us with this process. Because of the length of the county's procurement process, we actually had our first meeting with Dr. T 2 weeks ago. Since that time, Dr. T has been reviewing the draft report and commenting on framing and ways that we can strengthen the language to maximize the impact of our recommendations and the final work product overall. Just for everyone's awareness, the draft that was shared today is not yet reflective of Dr. T's input and feedback. However, I think if she's not on already, I think she will be joining for at least a portion of today's conversation.
Hey, Drew.
Yes.
Sorry, it's Terry. Couple emails came in from work group members and Dr. T that they were having a hard time logging on. Their emails weren't recognized. I think Leslie as well. So they wrote Lisa and asked for some technical assistance.
Got it. Okay. Lisa, I assume that you're working with the impacted members on troubleshooting those issues.
Yes, I'm working on that now. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Terry. So again, once we're able to have her join, the hope is that our discussion today will help Dr. T shape shape our report into a product that is reflective of the viewpoints of the members of the work group. So I acknowledge that the report was just circulated today and that you've likely not had sufficient time to review in depth. So just to orient you to kind of the structure, you'll note that we've included some discussion narrative that came from each of the 3 subcommittees in the report, and that we've grouped all of the recommendations at the end of the report. For each recommendation, we've done our best to add some additional information, specifically which departments in county government are responsible for implementation, whether legislation is required, whether new funding is required, and a timeline for implementation. You'll notice that the implementation timelines are defined as short, medium, and long term. In some cases, the timeline is designated as ongoing. So we're proposing that short term is defined as, generally defined as calendar year 2022. Medium would be defined as 2022 through 2023, and long term would be defined as by the end of the next county administration term. That does not mean that the medium and long term recommendations can't happen sooner. We were just trying to build in timelines that were realistic and reflective of reality of given the how significant some of these recommendations are going to be to implement. So my suggestion for today is that we spend some time discussing any general or specific feedback based on your initial views of the report today. We can make notes as we go along and incorporate feedback following today's meeting. And then to give everyone sufficient time to conduct a more thorough review of the draft, we will accept comments or feedback through the remainder of the month. So work group members are encouraged to send feedback directly to me. You can email, you can call. You can also share feedback through your respective work group chairs or co-chairs. So we acknowledge this is a very busy time of year with the holidays. So thank you for working on this in addition to all of the many other personal and professional obligations that accompany this time of year. So in the meantime, throughout the remainder of the month, we'll continue to work with Dr. T on the framing, structure, content of the report. And then all of this being said, I think we're still on track to post the report publicly within the first couple of weeks of January. And then, as discussed at a prior meeting, the report would remain posted for at least a month before the report is finalized and sent to the county executive. So that kind of brings us up to speed. Before we kind of open it up, I would ask if Madam Ayo, if you wanted to share any words at the top of the meeting here to guide us today, and same thing for any of our subcommittee chairs or co-chairs.
Thank you, Drew. No, I would just say thanks again to everyone. If you look at the document, I feel we're in a good place and have attempted to frame the robust discussions that we had leading up to and including our October meeting. And the team has done a great job framing them. We're so pleased that we were able to engage Dr. T to help us through technical assistance, as Drew said, finalize this particular document and then begin to work on some of the recommendations. Some things are already in motion based on our other ongoing month-to-month work with the compliance with the VCA. But I think we're in a good place, and it's exciting to see the recommendations as they're developing and preparing to be posted for public review. So thank you, Drew, for your leadership as well. This has been a great process thus far.
Thank you, Madam Ayo. Subcommittee chairs, co-chairs, anything you wanted to add?
I don't have anything. Thank you, Drew.
I don't have to add anything either, Drew. Just thank everybody for their hard work and time.
Yeah, ditto on that. And for me and Felipe, we were just going back and forth. There's some homework he gave our subcommittee that we need to reconvene to have a discussion about working on some real short-term stuff. But as far as the work in the report goes, I'm just glad Dr. T's on board, and I don't have any comments. Love to hear what people think.
Was Lisa able to get everybody else on? Drew, do you know?
Everybody except for Leslie, I'm still working with her, but everybody else is on.
Great, thank you, Lisa. And Terry, I think I gave you some additional homework as well, so we'll add that. There are a couple of pieces that are under development. We spoke last week. I think one of the themes throughout our discussions has been wanting to sort of deconcentrate affordable housing and deconcentrate poverty, and that to the extent that we're creating new opportunities and new affordable housing, we want that to be widespread through areas of opportunity and through all communities throughout the county. We wanted to make sure that that sort of theme was appropriately captured and highlighted in the report. So I've asked Terry to work with us on ensuring that we've got language that captures that policy objective. And then Terry, one of the other things that we talked about was a recommendation around the establishment of a permanent housing board. I know we talked a little bit about it at our prior meeting, but I don't think we've captured a recommendation on that yet. So just wanted to put a reminder out there on that, just for the record.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that piece. You know, as a technical aspect, as a PHA, the county is required to have a housing board, but I think the broader vision is to have a group with a diverse background in housing and sort of keep some of the themes from this going and have a thoughtful discussion about who the members of that are so that they're doing more than just their statutorily prescribed duties. So we'll make sure that that's included as well.
Okay, great. So with that, you know, the floor is really open. Again, I know that we've just distributed the draft of the report today, so you've had limited time to look at it. But you know, any thoughts that you have so far, we're happy to take now. And again, we will continue to accept input and feedback through the remainder of the month.
Drew, this is Steve. I do have one thing to, I guess, ask the members of my subcommittee. I drafted the context that is in this draft report, but if there are items that any of the subcommittee members feel that I didn't capture accurately or adequately, I'd certainly welcome them or their additional comments, so we make sure that, in fact, the work of the subcommittee is reflected.
I had meetings today, so I haven't really had a chance to review the report in detail, and I'd like to do that before I could, you know, scan it and pull something out like you do in grad school to just get through the seminar, but that's not the point of this. So so I will review it and try to get you some, you know, feedback reflecting actually having read it thoroughly. Thanks. But I appreciate all your work on it.
Mr. Greg Callis, ditto to that comment.
Also ditto. Yes, thank you.
So Drew, One question is, if Dr. T is on now, maybe she has some questions for us or some insight, given that she has had an opportunity to take a preliminary look, in case there's some homework that
Yeah.
we need to do from her
Yeah,
perspective.
and thank you, Madam AO, and welcome, Dr. T. Dr. T has had a draft of this report for a couple of weeks now, and I know is still actively reviewing it. But I know that Dr. T, you've had at least some time to review the recommendations. So yeah, I absolutely, if you're able and willing, invite you to share any initial thoughts or feedback on the report and kind of where we should look to kind of take things next.
Yeah, thank you so much, Drew. And also, I mean, I think just I don't have sort of formal comments to make now. I just want to say at a high level, one of the things that I'm listening for from the task force is sort of where you hope the report itself will land. My sense is, and this happens all the time, but my sense is the sort of first version of this and the way that it's done sort of lays out, I think, a pathway certainly to doing some great work across the region in terms of housing. The question is there an appetite or willingness to turn some of the very descriptive language into the language that is aspirational, right? So it's very like cut and dry. Like, this is who we are. This is where we met. These are our recommendations. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right, and that's exactly what the task force was charged with doing. And then I guess my sort of contribution to that is I think certainly all of this makes sense to me, and I have some inline comments just about some of the recommendations, but I think my question back to the task force is, to what extent are you trying to kind of share this more broadly? If it really is from our institutional actors, then it makes sense because it's very descriptive. It writes a blueprint for what you all want to do. If you want to engage a wider group of folks across Baltimore, at all different levels of scale, then you got to write it so that it opens the door so that they'll lean forward, right? And so I guess that's my question now to the task force. And my sense is, please don't let me sort of direct what you all are doing. I think my sense is to help you all do what it is you want to do. And if that's, you're speaking to institutional actors and you want it to be written that way, then my inline comments would be mostly just to sharpen that up and give clarity. If you are wanting to speak to a wider group of folks and wanting to get people excited about it beyond the kind of institutional actors, then there are lots of places, I think, to build in some of that more aspirational writing.
So I had a chance to look somewhat through this, of course, also not time enough to really see whether everything is in there that should go from our subcommittee. For example, I didn't compare it with the previous work group report, but so I'm impressed about how much is in there and how well it is put together. I have some questions about, or some suggestions maybe about the structure of how this is done. So in the beginning, after the introduction of our task and who are the members, there is this chapter of background and findings, and that kind of jumps back and forth between the subcommittee discussions and then findings again. And I think that could be structured better, and especially when it comes to the land use issues. There are a bunch of maps. There's a lot of space taken up with the land use discussion, and maybe it's not clear enough why this was done, because obviously the discussion from us was that there may be not enough land that is allowing affordable housing. And so if this could be a little more concentrated, you started having on page 7 the graph that gives the relative size of certain land use designations, but it is maybe not enough to really make clear what all these maps are about, and that the concern was to open up more land for affordable housing. I mean, if it's just made clear that that was the key finding, and that the finding and the discussion of the groups is separated more clearly. And then when it comes to the recommendations that begin on page 22, we'd have to probably start on a new page, but that's the detail. It's these recommendations are numbered through from 1 through or whatever 2034, but they are interrupted in between with different types of intermittent observations or principles, or I'm not quite sure how that is meant, and I think that could be also ordered. So there are up to number, hold on one second, 20. I think it is consecutively just the recommendations with the responsibilities, but then at the end of 20, there is a sentence, the work group recommends the following strategies, and then it comes, invest in existing older communities where there is affordable housing in order to improve opportunities. And that's a strategy included there. And then from underneath that particular strategy is one number, bullet 21. And then comes another strategy. And then under that, there are a lot of numbered recommendations. And so I think that is not clear enough how these recommendations are structured. And I would say that they should be ordered, like at the very end, there's all of a sudden a headline in there or a header that says governance actions. Maybe that is the way how the rest should be structured, that it has titles in between, which as governance actions, land use actions, financial actions, and so forth. And specifically between 21 and 22, I think there is not enough delineation. When I remember this correctly, in our work group, we talked about this item that is in front of 21, which is to invest in older communities. So that our fear was that we would look exclusively at where the opportunity zones are and put the additional affordable housing there, but forget about the older communities that have a lot of affordable housing in it. And so this item that's described before 21 is talking about that, but then the strategy 21 is again just saying it is all about modernizing and existing and rehabbing existing housing, when it should actually be including fixing up the whole community, so that to make communities that are not opportunity communities also afford more like opportunity areas. And the item to fix the existing housing stock in those communities is number 22 already, so it shouldn't be duplicated in there. Sorry, this may all sound very confusing to anybody who doesn't have all this right.
Not confusing to me at all.
Okay.
Well, so grappled with.
And so then just one last thing is, so when there is in the beginning the discussion from the work groups, that's certainly one way to do it, but then the recommendations are really not sorted by work groups, but put comprehensively together, and maybe there should be a decision made that either everything is comprehensively just from harvesting from across all the work groups, or we have reference to individual work groups, what they said, but that could be also in an appendix. I would recommend that there would be an appendix in which the specific recommendations from each work group are actually compiled, so that one can go back and look what they actually said. That's all I have at this moment.
Yeah, that's all really good, Klaus. Thank you for that feedback. You know, you're highlighting a couple of things that I think we grappled with as we were putting this together, and I'm in agreement with a lot of your recommendations. Some of them came from the challenge of taking work products from 3 subcommittees and trying to combine it into a cohesive document. So some of the breaks that you see in the recommendations were ways that different subcommittees framed their recommendations that we didn't want to do away with altogether. But I think that your suggestion about maybe coming up with some themes for the recommendations using your, the governance actions as an example may be a good way to do it. I can tell you, I initially had this organized as, recommendations by subcommittee. But we ended up not doing it that way because, once each subcommittee brings these recommendations to the full work group, I think the idea that we wanted is that now they become recommendations from the full work group, not just from a particular subcommittee. So that's why we wanted to frame it that way in the main body of the report. But, perhaps including an appendix to show which recommendations came from where is perhaps a good way to handle it, something that we can consider. I made notes of some of your other observations as well, but we may want to just follow up offline to make sure that we're capturing all of your helpful feedback there. So thank you.
If I could just add one sentence, because Dr. T asked about the aspirational part, and I agree that that should be clear, what the end product is that we want to see, what kind of county do we want to see at the end of this. And not only that there is enough affordable housing, but that I have kept on saying that we are not building housing, but we're building communities, so that the affordable housing is really fully integrated. It doesn't really stick out. It's part of community, and it becomes part and parcel of how we do community. I think something like those aspirations should be in there. And in our particular subcommittee, we had a lot of discussion. We had a sentence in there about undoing the racist past of the county in housing policies. And there was a lot of discussion whether that was an appropriate thing to say or not. And we were then, the majority, in agreement that that should be in there. And I don't think such language is still in here somewhere.
It is, Klaus. It's in there.
I remember seeing that under the section for discussion from the best practices policy and legal subcommittee.
On page 12.
I think a challenge with the aspirational issue is that the tone of the report is also, it's like, well, if we're trying to engage a broad, the county as a whole, whatever that means exactly, we would need to define, but to seek implementation of these goals, what's the most effective tone for the report to have, if that's useful, because I think it's some of my concern is, well, what's the right tone given what we want to achieve, and doesn't always make sense to have a tone that reflects the conclusion you want to get to, but maybe it does. So it's just, I don't know. I could get very aspirational, but I don't know what the most effective way to go about getting to those aspirations is. And I'm not sure that the work group members would agree exactly on what those aspirations are either, which of course is also part of the challenge, right? I agree with Klaus that, we want to be building sustainable communities, equitable communities also, and that thinking about the whole community, when we look at it that way, it's a broader vision for the future of the county, but I also think that may be a little beyond the scope of this work group. So that's another challenge. That's more of a master plan type vision, maybe.
Yeah, no, I mean, those are good. Those are good thoughts. And I was having a thought as you were speaking, and as Klaus was speaking, and I guess this is my privilege of chairs. I can create and assign additional work for people. I'm sort of thinking to that end, it might make sense to convene and maybe have Dr. T facilitate this along with some of the county staff. Facilitate a small group that would be, that would be open to any work group members that want to be on it. but maybe we should pull together a small group of some of us offline to have that discussion on what we want that aspirational statement to say, so that it's reflective of all of the conversations that we've had here. And perhaps task that group with developing something that that could be inserted into the report, rather than us just saying we should have this in there and then having one person draft it or come up with it. Perhaps we can have interested members sort of contribute to that, and then roll that back up to the full group. So what do we think about that suggestion?
Well, I love where you're going with that. I think what's interesting, Dr. T, I don't want to never misquote somebody when they're right there on the call with you, but I think from what I've read and in our conversations together, there's sort of a catch-22, which is you want to make these meaningful statements about moving past the past into the future while still being very open to other people's perceptions of these things, and not, I think I heard Amy, not ram it right at them like, this is what we want, too bad what you think. And I think, Dr. T, maybe you're the right person to help us stitch those competing factors together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. And that's why I'm listening to you all to hear kind of what's the tone that you want to strike. I think more than anything you want, so depending on who this is going, where you want this to land and who's supposed to take this and like work from it. If it really is to direct, county departments, developers, et cetera, the more institutional folks to do this, then this is probably fine, right? We can sort of work on the language, but you want to just give them a, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, do this, that, like, this is how you do that. But if you want this to have, right, meaning beyond those folks who are directly and intimately involved in these issues and already understand the technical jargon and the language of affordable housing, if you want this to have that kind of landing, then you gotta build it so that folks will see their way into it. Because right now they won't. It's technically written for the folks that you need to move into action, which is exactly right? So don't take that out. But if you want to bring those other folks along, right, then that needs to change. So aspirationally, the sort of very solutions focused messaging right at the top, right? What is this, even in terms of the title of the report, right? What are we doing here, right? This is Klaus, you said this is about building community. This is about whatever that is, right? We won't be able to have the Baltimore County that we want unless we invest in affordable housing. Affordable housing in this community, or housing overall, is one of the smartest investments we could possibly be making right now. And here's why, right? Not just because a group of folks may get housing that they didn't have, but because of what it does for all of us, right? You got to get people into that conversation. And we can create that language at the top, right, to certainly bring people into the conversation so that then when you get to the technical stuff, they know why they should actually lean forward through, right, and fight through all the technical jargon, because there's something in there that's actually meaningful for them. And I would also say, as I was going through the recommendations, each one, there's a way to also at least give a sort of aspirational statement first and then describe the technical specifics next. And the reason you want to do that is so that, right, you get to the extent that you want this, you get folks to understand the reasoning why you want to do X, Y, and Z, and then you give the actual very specific conversation about what you want to do. So I can go through the document and help you get there. But before I do that, I want to make sure that I'm on the same page with you all in terms of how you're thinking about this, how you want this to be used, and who you actually are inviting to this party here. Right? Who's coming to the party, and how do you want, who do you want to come?
And Dr. T, I agree with that approach, because again, that's going to what you said earlier, from here's the vision, and then going further down to how the work group discussed the topics, and here are the tangibles. And then we get into the timeframes, because we have to be able to address the larger vision of what affordable housing means for Baltimore County, because that's the vision. That's why we want the broader audience. And maybe as we're working through this over the next couple of weeks, we can have that discussion with you as to who is the most viable audience, who needs to get the big picture, and then how we're moving further and further down into here are the tangible, concrete steps to get there. But I think if we don't have some of the aspirational vision and setting that um, tone and setting that stage for this is how we're trying to get to what affordable housing means in Baltimore County. I think we need that. Will nicely dovetail with the direct tangibles that this document I think does a good job at doing.
Can I piggyback on that a little bit? Like others, I haven't had a chance to read this in detail, and I'm madly skimming through to sort of see how it comes together. I'd like to reinforce a little bit the point that Klaus was making about, there are opportunity areas and there are areas of lower opportunity that need to have a broader range of issues addressed, not just housing. And I think that's an important message to convey to the larger public. I mean, the report identifies some short-term funding sources that may be able to help us, but there's always going to be challenges in terms of the funding that's available, whether it's just looking at affordable housing or addressing some of the other opportunity gaps in some of these older communities. And so you need to be able to sell to the public why this is important.
Right.
And there are a lot of people in opportunity areas who probably don't want to see a lot of affordable housing brought into their communities. So there's a huge educational effort, I think, that certainly the communications work group is focused on. But to me, whether it's in this document or a companion to this document, it's really, we need to educate the broader community as to why accepting affordable housing in their communities, that may mean changing zoning, that may mean requiring inclusionary, housing. It may mean requiring a funding source at some point in time. But the bigger picture is it doesn't just benefit the people who are getting some assistance with housing or perhaps assistance in their neighborhoods. It has to be a pitch that resonates for the larger community. And that's tough. But I think it's an important way of thinking about any restructuring of this that gets done is edits.
I was going to second what Stacy and Dr. T said. I think in making the language more aspirational, it will also make our work more accessible to the broader public, right? These meetings are open to the public and these documents are going to go online. So I think for the average citizen, that kind of language will be more meaningful. And I would say that the vision is already implicit in the report, only with technical language, right? So it's about translating some of the assumptions there into a more aspirational language, a vision statement of sorts. And being us a broad, diverse group as we are here, I think we have some legitimacy to make that more aspirational language part of the document, right? So sustainable communities, communities that are racially integrated, they're equitable, all those bullet points there, they try to achieve that, right? We're just not, the statement is not there yet, but the elements of the vision are implicit in those bullet points.
I would say I just want to echo that. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. You're not changing the report at all. You are providing translating some of that so that folks can lean forward. And I would say even, and again, I want to also, Drew, you had made a good suggestion of having a smaller group or some group of us to do a little work on that. Because one of the things I want to test is how sort of big you want to make the story, right? So that it feels like the tone of this body. So one way to do that is to start really, really big, right? And just talk about what we love about Baltimore, right? Baltimore is an incredibly creative, innovative place. Our people are enterprising, right? We want, you want to start there and say this working group was led by folks who deeply care about the future of our region. And because of that, right, and then you can start talking about what it means to be thinking about housing, right? All of the creative energy you got in Baltimore is great, except it doesn't matter. People don't have a place to live, which is why this incredibly dedicated group of folks came together to do this work, to think about what it would mean to make sure that every resident in Baltimore County has a place to live in a thriving place, an opportunity community, however we want to say that. And that livability remains like the hallmark of our competitive advantage, right? And you can talk about that, but to give it that kind of life, and then you can go on to the more technical. So how do we get there? Well, let us tell you. We got how many recommendations? 31, I think it is, right? We got 31 recommendations, but here's the gist of it. They focus on this, they focus on this, they focus on this. And if you read through, what you'll find is that we wanted to preserve, right? We wanted to make sure that we wanted to, and we characterize it that way, then you give people a reason to want to dive into what those specifics are. So I want to hear you all how big you want to make that. Maybe that might be too big for you, for some of you, but you may want to keep it here. But that two-way conversation, I think, is what I'm listening for as I hear you all talking, who you're talking to and what you're going to be able to share with folks.
And we're really glad you are pushing us in that direction a little bit, because I think we may not have discussed that sufficiently in our work group as an entirety. When the danger is that we are doing this because we are on some kind of consent decree and we have to double the number of units over what we got so far, and we have a deadline, and that should not really be. That's not the motive. And as you say, the motive is to have a competitive county. And, we can take any of the discussions that we currently have on the table, whether that's our drastically risen crime rate, whether that is our redistricting and the question of packing or breaking districts. We have not always integrated communities. So the only thing we really discussed at some length, at least in our subcommittee, was the racial history, and that we want to overcome that. But essentially, how we put housing into the landscape in Baltimore County, what kind of housing and where is it and what type is where, is really defining everything. And that's how we get the concentrations of race, that's how we get the concentrations of poverty, that's how we get failing schools, that's how we get everything. So it's probably really good that you pushed us a little bit to think about that again and put this up front. And if a work group can be created to kind of own this down is good, but I think we need to get to some consensus here today that now, since all the work groups are together here, whether everybody shares that view.
I have kind of a pointed comment about a few of the recommendations, and this may fall under the umbrella of the discussion about the tone and being aspirational, but I was a member of the zoning subcommittee, and I think all of our recommendations appear in numbers maybe 5 through 14, I think. 13, 14. And a lot of these, to me, come off in this report as though we're saying that all of these things need to be done. And that wasn't, I don't think, really the tone of our subcommittee report. It was more like we were providing examples of tools that could be used to make it easier to develop this throughout the county. And I just noticed in some of the other recommendations, for example, that it says to explore doing certain things or to study or evaluate. And I feel like that type of tone might be appropriate for these as well, or maybe they all come under one recommendation with multiple things to explore the types of tools. But I think it comes across, and it's not necessarily a great idea that it comes across as being all of these things should be done, because some of these things are quite controversial, frankly. And I think that the group made tough recommendations, or the subcommittee made tough recommendations, but as ideas, not necessarily mandates.
I want to take one step further. You got specific, and I'm going to be even more specific, because there is one thing in an overarching theme we talk about, and this was out of our same group as well, that there's clearly, and we went through 5 pages of definitions here to show the one point that there's not enough multifamily zoning to do what we need to do, and multifamily developments are a major tool in the toolbox of being able to create affordable housing. So that's acknowledged up top, but when you get in here, the definition of affordable housing really just talks about income levels. Then yes, we've created greater opportunity in commercial and industrial zones to allow multifamily. But then when it gets into all the other residential districts, it just strictly says allow affordable housing projects by right, but that really doesn't talk about multifamily. We've missed the connection there. I mean, basically, if I read this, I said, yes, I'm allowed to build a $500,000 house and rent it to someone at 50% AMI. And I mean, we already have that right now. What we don't have is the ability to do multifamily housing in these other residential districts. And I wonder if that's something that was intentional or just something that was missed.
Pete and or Leslie as the co-chairs of the zoning subcommittee. Do you want to respond to those points? I think both are well taken comments.
I'll speak to the multifamily. I think the idea was to allow multifamily and all the other zoning classifications. I think when we said affordable housing, I think we were talking about, we threw out the ideas of PUDs. It doesn't, regardless of what the zoning is, if it's a good design, it doesn't matter what type of unit it is. We allow that type of unit to occur on that property, meaning, multifamily. I think that was, so if we need to make that connection, we need to make that connection.
Right. And that's, I thought we were too. But when I saw this, I was like, it seems to be missing somewhere in there. Maybe it should say allow multiple family development housing that meets affordable housing definitions by right or something like that. I didn't know whether it was going to be taken care of in a definitional thing or something, but it's certainly missing in these documents right now. It doesn't make that connection.
Right. I agree that was the intent. And if we need to change that, then we should change it to make it clear. Since I also have not had time to read this in detail, I don't know if it addresses some of the things that I last brought up, which were that some of the current processes that the county has would still potentially interfere with multifamily housing being built, even if it is of right in a particular zone or in all residential zones, since people can object and at various times throughout the process. So, and when I reread the Red Maple decision, that's when I again realized, well, that was housing of right in that zone, and it was still stopped. And then we had a somewhat of a recommendation. I'm not sure if it's still in here because I haven't had time to read it, but about housing where we wouldn't have like the ALJ hearing or something like that would be waived, but it's in that exemption statute, limited exemption, but those developments would still go to the Board of Appeals, which is another huge issue. So again, I'm not sure if that's in here.
Those are in there, Leslie.
Okay.
They're in there.
Okay. And again, there'd be like part of the controversial problems, but that's, a huge problem in terms of getting affordable housing built, multifamily housing, or any type of affordable housing potentially in the county.
As I said, I think there's a huge communications issue. I think many people don't really understand what affordable housing needs are. They may get it if it's an elderly person, who's not working. It may be somebody who was disabled. They get that, but there's still a lot of stereotypes about who people are that get housing assistance. And I think for that reason, there's a huge amount of education that's necessary, as I said before. The zoning committee, at least I think, was supportive of investigating in more detail all of the things that, Chris raised as being, did we recommend them or did we say they should be considered? I think, some of that comes down to what's short-term and what's midterm. I'm a big fan of the inclusionary housing process because I think that means that there's a little bit of affordable housing a lot of places, but that's going to take a sell. It's going to take a sell to the developers and their attorneys and the people in the neighborhood. So I think there's so much in this report. I think there was one item I noticed was mid to longer term. Almost everything is short and midterm. And it may be worth thinking some more about, loading up some of the educational efforts more in the short term. And it's going to take some time to build support for getting it into all of the opportunity areas and all the zoning districts. I wish I was optimistic that that would be just waving a magic wand and we could all get it adopted really quickly, but I think it's going to be difficult. So we should be realistic in terms of what the priorities are for the shorter terms.
And these last 3 or 4 comments really shed a light on a few unresolved issues that the county revisits time and again when it comes to zoning disputes and LHJ hearings and whatnot. That's the unresolved relationships between the master plan, the transects, the community plans, and the zoning. And I think the solution, all of this speaks to housing all the time. And so the solution, we can't solve all of this with this work group here, but we should point to it very clearly that the physical, what we imagine the county to look like physically is tried to be translated into these transects and in the master plan about density and urbanized areas. And zoning itself, the lowest level, is usually all we have to go by, and that's not enough. So the master plan needs to be strengthened, and the community plans need to be strengthened, and this idea of the transects needs to be strengthened, because that all would allow to put multifamily into the right places.
Well, I think the VCA, the Voluntary Compliance Agreement, was executed in 2016. So at least there's been some time to be educating people the past 5 years or so. So hopefully some of that's been done.
Leslie, I'd like to, I guess, ask your opinion of whether you think it was, because from this broader perspective that the CE has talked about, what does affordable housing really mean and what does it look like in Baltimore County? I can't say that as a Baltimore County resident or having come into this position in 2019, I can't say that I feel like we have done that in a robust kind of way to articulate that vision. And that's why I feel like the work group's efforts, in addition to what we talk about on a regular basis in the VCA compliance activities, that's where the synergy comes together, that we need that. And that's one of the pieces from the communication subcommittee that we're emphasizing, and hence the appeal that some of the document address that in a broader way, because we've got recommendations in there about educating the community, but I don't think that we've done a robust education of the community about what affordable housing means and what it can be for Baltimore County.
Yeah, my sense is that it hasn't really happened. I mean, since the conciliation agreement was signed, a whole bunch of developments have run into a whole bunch of opposition and have been, So that's what we're trying to change. So that doesn't sound like a whole lot of progress over the last 5 years to me. So I think the
On the
idea,
communication.
yeah, the idea from starting, hopefully starting with this report is to really, and then that was sort of my, I mean, this all sounds terrific to me. I think someone meant, I think Dr. T, it might have been you talking about, do we, or, you know, because we are hoping to do more robust research about what is the story that in people's heads when they hear about affordable housing in Baltimore County. And so we're trying to kind of, sounds to me like we're trying to get started on that in this report while still leaving room to learn more and better hone our message. And so, but I would think that the main question in terms of audiences and what we're trying to do with this report is, can it start that process? Can it start to lay out a vision that will resonate with people in Baltimore County about what we're trying to get to? And the sort of the discussion has been really good. I mean, it illustrates the tension between the aspirational and then the nitty gritty, you know, a lot. So, you know, so the can we start to get at that in this report and then use additional research to make more progress over time?
I want to make a comment before I have to leave. Of course, I too have not had enough time to read this in a lot of detail, but just piggybacking on the need for the communication piece and what is affordable houses? How do you define it? Even in my community of Turner Station, there has been some opposition that is existing for building a brand new home that on a lot that's owned by Baltimore County next to another individual home. There was lots of opposition simply because I believe, and this is my belief, is that they really didn't understand what affordable housing was mean, what the intent of it is. The comment the resident made was, we have enough of this around us already. We have this across the street I'm dealing with. He's dealing with this and dealing with that. So you know, even in our community. So I see it's really, really neat. How do we get to the broader community? And this is a great start. Really, really great start to spring off of. That it's really needed in addition to the zoning piece. How do we get beyond that? How do we get beyond whereas there's opposition because people have the power to vote and against this. So there are many challenges. I really will add more once I read it in its entirety, but I just wanted to kind of share that, you know, it exists everywhere in the county. The definition, how do we define it? How do we define it where the residents, you know, getting right down to the communities, really understand what the future of Baltimore, the intent for the future of Baltimore County is. Thank you.
Yeah, that was excellent. Both Dan and also Gloria too. For both of what you both said, I think the way to possibly look at this is in addition to laying out the plan for what needs to happen in lots of these recommendations, it is to start the process of having people think differently about right, affordable housing as a thing. And part of that may be, you know, maybe not starting, and I know this may be controversial, but maybe not starting out the conversation talking about affordable housing because you know that people already have preconceived notions about what that is. There are lots of ways to have the same conversation, but sort of change that language, right? So that it's the thing that you're asking people to do and to desire as an aspiration is a thing that everybody wants. You want to have a home in a great place, right? How do we make sure that, you know, all of the residents of Baltimore County have a home in a great place? It's really that simple. It's not even more complicated than that. And then we talk about what that means. Well, part of what that means is that we have to make sure that there are more affordable, right, options for folks, right, across the county. And we recognize, right, you can talk about all the different challenges, but here's our solutions for how we begin to turn that ship around. So I think that's right. And I think, again, I'm happy to write some language in that regard and then have people react to that as like a bridge too far or a bridge exactly where we're trying to go, right?
I think that would be helpful to us, Dr. T.
This is Greg Callis, and why I don't disagree with a lot of the conversation. That is conversation that says that folks don't know what you mean when you start talking about affordable housing, that's because affordable housing is defined by people within the industry as different things to different people. And I would encourage that dialogue and conversation. Um, but let's not fool ourselves. The fact of the matter is that when people think about affordable housing, they think about it fits a certain stereotype. It might be public housing. It's usually poor Black people, and that's what people are objecting to. And so, yes, let's explain it. But there also has to be, and I'm not asking people to be self-righteous, but there has to be some statement, and I've said this before too, that the law is the law, and what the county is attempting to do is to obey the law because it had been out of compliance with the law for many, many years. We ought to make that clear to you in any sort of some statement. And again, I haven't looked at it, and so I'll go back and perhaps suggest some language.
I agree with that, Greg.
Mr. Conte.
I'll just say that in the beginning, when Dr. T and Klaus and Amy, I guess, were talking about aspirational language and talking to the people more like lay people as opposed to just industry people, that in my mind, that was also to the people who may be able to access some of this housing, not just the people who think that they don't want people in, because aspirational to me is more open and kind of welcoming, I guess. And the entire time from the very start of these meetings, it's always been this concern about what the people who are already very well housed and sometimes very, very, very wealthy neighborhoods or very full of opportunity areas who don't want other people in. And we know, of course, that exists, but maybe we could try to view it in some other way, or just not accept that as legitimate anymore. I mean, they've had enough time to understand, and like Greg said, this is federal law. Even if there weren't the VCA, everybody's saying that they want this, but it is, it is a law, and it hasn't been happening historically, but even in the last 5 years since there's been a VCA, and there have been, housing that's been built that could have offered some housing under the VCA, and it did not. And there's housing that's just been stopped, whether it's St. Mark's on the Hill or Red Maple. So it's got to be more than, I think even though I'm not saying we don't want to talk to people and educate people, but we kind of have to get beyond that. We can't be spending a whole lot of time educating people. And I mean, we have to simultaneously be getting something done because we're way behind. And people, they need, good quality housing in good neighborhoods with good schools, et cetera. And we need to start working to get that done for moving forward.
Leslie, I just don't know how to get us past that if we can't get a broader group of people politically to support the goal. I mean, so I
Kind of where the law
I
comes
hear
in.
you. I don't know how to get there without.
Well, it's where the
actually
law
trying to
comes
persuade
in,
more
and
people.
it's like continuing violations of the Fair Housing Act. And at some point, the complainants or HUD or maybe even new complainants are going to stop talking and start, wanting to push a little bit harder on the legal front. So I think that's, this was filed years ago and came together as a conciliation and voluntary compliance agreement, but that meant everybody needs to comply and do their work. And when you have the NIMBYism and individual council people getting, ordinances passed so something can get built here and here and here, that is not compliance. Like NIMBYism in itself is a violation of the Fair Housing Act. So basically, if the county is supporting that, that's a violation, and violating the Fair Housing Act in and of itself is a violation of the VCA. It's incorporated into the VCA that any further violations of the Fair Housing Act violate the VCA. So, I don't want to get too far in those weeds, but the county needs, it's time for the county to address people, try to do the education, but simultaneously, if they're going to come out and, still protest or do their whatever, the county really needs to be forceful in explaining to them, as Greg said, that this is a law and, we haven't complied with the law for a long time, but now we really have to. And, so I understand that when you're working at the community level, it's really hard, and that's what it's like you're trying to bring people around, but we need more than that. We need multiple kind of multi-layered ways of addressing this.
But is that, Leslie, is that what you want the message of this report to be? That we should build this housing because the federal government is making us do it?
I don't think that should be the message, but I think that if we're gonna, I don't think we can just continue to placate communities that for decades have been refusing and refusing to allow housing to be built, and the mechanisms that exist in Baltimore County have allowed that to happen. So yes and no, I guess.
You don't need this report for that. I mean, that's the case now, right? I mean, the just the unfortunate, from whatever, I mean, whether it's for, the reality is that in order to carry out these things, people who get elected need to be able to do them and keep getting elected. I mean, that's to me, that's the goal of this report is that I mean, I totally understand where you're coming from. It's my whole job to explain to people what the requirements of the Fair Housing Act are.
Right.
But like, just that's not particularly compelling, I think, to your average citizen. And so my understanding, at least, of the goal of this report is to try to make doing the right thing, which also happens to be required by federal fair housing law, to show how that's actually what you would want to do too.
Yeah, I think that was your subcommittee's, what do you call it, designation or whatever. And I don't disagree with it, but I don't think that that's the only piece of what this report is supposed to be doing. I mean, what we're supposed to be doing, one of the things in the zoning and infrastructure subcommittee was to make recommendations about what parts of the laws, zoning ordinances, et cetera, that need to be changed so that some of these obstacles can't be obstacles anymore. So that's a different thing than just having people agree with you, which is kind of like your educational piece, which is one aspect.
They need to be changed by people who have been elected to office. Like that's the only way that they're going to be changed.
Yeah. Oh. And as I said, I think there are multiple ways that this has to be dealt with. And that's why we have 3 subcommittees. We could have had more, but
So Dan, I don't want to belabor this and we go on and on and on, but the fact is that if in fact there is a magic communications tool or method in order to convince, as you said, folks to do the right thing, then so be it. But my point, and the point I think that Leslie is buttressing and supporting, is that yes, it is the law, and the law has not been followed for over 50 years. And in some cases, around this state and other places throughout this country, it's still not being followed. And what does that? I mean, I sort of hands off, even though I live in Randallstown. I took sort of a hands off approach to appearing at neighborhood meetings where there was a protest about affordable housing developments that were going there. And what were some of the folks saying, who were African American, by the way? They were saying, we don't want public housing. So you explain to folks, this is not public housing. Why is all of this housing being placed in our neighborhood? Why do we share the brunt? And that's something that I think even folks that are on these committees, on this work group, have acknowledged that has been the burden that African Americans and brown communities have had to suffer in this county as well as throughout the country for way too long. When is it going to be shared? Which I think is the point that Leslie was making about development going on around Towson. All of this apartment development, and no place was there that I've seen an effort to put affordable housing or mix affordable housing in among those housing products. I mean, that just happened. And so it's like, saying that this is the law is simply an acknowledgement of, hey, this is the law. And in terms of what politicians have done and haven't done, surely, Dan, you haven't forgotten, it was politicians that passed the Fair Housing Act. Now, we can debate what's happened in this country politically over the last 50 years or so. But the fact of the matter is that, that's going to go up, that's going to go down. And usually, right, if there's some way that we can communicate the rightness of the actions of the county, then yes, we should do that. But I don't think that we should stand away from the fact that, this is the law. We're a society or government, supposedly, of law.
So circling back to this communication topic that we discussed right here now, on page 12, the recommendations, the very first recommendation is that the county should move with the retention of a skilled consultant. But when it says that, it's not clear what that skilled consultant is to be doing. I mean, I understand from the context that that's a consultant about communication, but it should be made clear there. As far as why there is so much pushback always is because the county doesn't have any good affordable housing to show for. And most jurisdictions don't. So in the United States, affordable housing is a stigma because you're looking at public housing, or you look also at multifamily housing that's run by private entities, and to get very unpleasant, basically, accommodations. My wife is a Red Cross volunteer, and she deals with the victims of fires. And it is just incredible how many apartment fires there are, because these multifamily affordable housing units are built in a shitty way, and they are not safe. And so it's a catch-22 when you look at the city of Baltimore rebuilding now Perkins Homes and Somerset. That's where they are mixing affordable and market rate and retail and everything. I hope that then we have at least nearby something to show for, where we can say, this is what we mean when we talk about this. we gotta have examples when we communicate about what is the physical manifestation of what is our vision. And as long as we don't have that, everybody imagines something that they have seen before and seen somewhere in Baltimore County and they didn't like it. And that's what we need to get rid of. And so that's part of this communication consultant, I suppose. But that's where it has to go. I mean, I speak as an architect, but the physical manifestation is always at the end what people have in their minds.
I agree 100%. When Howard County was considering inclusionary housing, because Howard County is expensive, and Columbia had been founded with the idea that it would be open to a diverse population, but what was happening outside Columbia didn't account for that. We went down to Montgomery County, and Tom Perez, back in the old days before he went off to work for the federal government, was the councilman. And he drove us around and we looked at examples of built projects that were mixed income. And when you do mixed income, you've got some percentage, 5, 10, 15, 20% that's affordable. But you're not stigmatizing the whole project as being those people. And they were great examples. Sometimes they were townhouses, sometimes they were apartments, sometimes they were mixed use. But it was obvious that you could build these things and they were livable and they were doing well. And the income that came from the market rate component of whatever was in the project helped keep those projects up. When Klaus was talking about some of the older housing that's being rebuilt in Baltimore City, if it's 100% affordable housing and rents don't go up, you need a continuing feed of money to maintain those properties. So it's important to be able to have good examples that are new, but good examples that can be maintained long term. And I don't know that you're ever going to be able to educate the entire population, but there could be, through this consultant, a video put together that could demonstrate examples for the county council who absolutely need to adopt this. And if you just tell them it's a federal law, it's going to be harder for them to go against their constituents. If it's something that's posted online and they can share it with their constituents and some, groups that are supportive of affordable housing, I think that we could build support for much more aggressive approaches.
I'd like to piggyback on that, Marcia. I couldn't agree with you more because while you were talking, I was just saying, since we don't have it here yet, but here's the vision and here's what we're talking about. How would you feel about that? Because I think when you engage people and you begin to talk about the vision and then you give them a tangible example, that does change their perspective of what they think. Because I guess when we're just talking about Randallstown saying, well, this is low income housing as opposed to affordable housing or mixed mixed income housing. People immediately jump to this is public housing. This is the projects, or this is multifamily dwelling projects that are going to bring our property value down. I mean, that's where people are stuck. Unless we proactively reach out and articulate the vision and then even give examples of other places where this has been done and is viable here and acceptable, so that we don't run into this brick wall of NIMBYism every time we try to develop something.
When I, in a previous job, we did several bus tours of Montgomery County's MPDU projects. And we did those for legislators, we did those for community association leaders, a range of stakeholders. And, there's nothing like seeing it in the flesh and seeing it in person, I think, and being able to talk with people that are actually involved in implementing it on the ground. And that might be something to consider if, as part of trying to engage the council and some of the
community leaders,
key stakeholders that they would be listening to in thinking through whether to support zoning changes.
And I mean, I would think community leaders as well, because I think Gloria's point is well taken, that even within Turner Station, all of the reinvestment in housing redevelopment, and that was initially workforce housing. It wasn't public housing, it was workforce housing, and now they're redeveloping it. But getting key community leaders to say, here's the vision. In addition to the vision, here's what we're talking about. Here's what it is, whether that's a virtual tour or a bus tour. Because until we get critical mass in terms of people understanding what it is, that's why we're saying this piece about I don't think we, the county, in collaboration with a broader group of colleagues like this work group, we haven't done that. The county hasn't done that. Because I know we haven't done it since I've been here, and I've been here since 2019. And prior to that, between 2016 and 2019, if somebody can tell me we did that, then I'll be surprised. So the time is now to articulate the broader vision, then give the tangible examples so that we get more buy-in. That's why we're advocating for the broader vision of what Baltimore County's vision of affordable housing can be. It's a combination of mixed income. It's community revitalization by addressing needs in community like they're doing in Turner Station with the Henrietta Lacks project. It's impressive if you go there and see it. So that's my 2 cents why I feel like the communication part on the front end. But Klaus, your point is well taken. If we didn't do enough to articulate that in the language surrounding the recommendation that we made, then that's the part that we'd like to, enhance with Dr. T's assistance.
Hey, Drew.
Councilman.
Izzy, I have a comment. I just want to make a clarification because I don't have a great connection, but I've been listening carefully as the connection comes through. But I'm going to take a little bit of exception to St. Mark's on the Hill being the poster child for NIMBYism, because St. Mark's on the Hill was not approved in the last CZMP, not because of whether it was affordable housing or market rate housing. It was the site itself was not primed for development. So I take exception to the comment that St. Mark's on the Hill was not approved because the proposal was affordable housing. It was because that site was not appropriate for market rate. And we've been looking for alternatives related to open space, but I'm just not gonna, I'm not gonna agree with that comment. I'm not sure who made the comment, however. And I want that to go on the record because it was on the record during the last CZMP.
Thank you, Councilman. And just a reminder, these sessions are recorded and available on the website. So everything said here is on the public record going forward.
Right. Thank you.
Just to get back quickly to examples, I think this may be because of the work Marcia did in Howard County. You don't have to drive to Montgomery County to see examples of this anymore. You can go see Burgess Mill Station or Monarch Mills in Columbia. I also think there is, I mean, last time I saw Towns at Woodfield, that looked really good. I think there are examples in Baltimore County too now. So I think there are places people can go to show the kind of quality that publicly assisted housing has these days.
So there's been a lot of good discussion today. I think a lot of this can be captured in our report, although we do have a timeline that we're working with. So we'll have to figure out the kind of the next practical steps to incorporate some of this feedback. I will point out that one of the recommendations that we have in the report is to establish a standing committee. It's not necessarily this specific work group, but it could be members of this work group plus some other stakeholders or members of the public. I believe that was one of the recommendations of the communications subcommittee. So we are capturing a forum here for these conversations to continue beyond the publication of this report, kind of ingrain that into our structure here. So we do have a landing place for a lot of these conversations moving forward that it could continue to inform county policy and our collective approach to this issue.
Drew, we should probably have a deadline by which we would give written comments after we all had more time.
I said at the beginning through the end of the month.
Okay.
If that's
sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, I'm thinking just our timeline that we discussed at the prior meeting was to get this posted for public comment in January. So I figure if we can take the remainder of the month to accept comments after you've had additional time to kind of review in depth. I acknowledge that this is during the holidays, which is tough, but we also know that kind of that week in between Christmas and New Year's often affords us some quiet time and some opportunity to do work like this. So perhaps we can take some of that time to make comments on this report that we can incorporate before our public posting deadline. And I think we should follow up on the suggestion that was made earlier to convene a group of interested work group members to flesh out, some aspirational statements that we could include. Again, I think some of that might rest with the ongoing work, but we want to have something up front that's in line with what was stated today and described by some of the members and Dr. T. So I'm going to suggest maybe Terry, that you and I and Dr. T circle up offline to figure out the best way to pull that together in an expedient fashion.
Right there with you. Do we want to prompt folks up front that if they are particularly interested and able to give us some time, that they give us a heads up as we plan this out?
I'd be happy to help if.
This is Jason Williams. I'd be happy to help. Just I'm not sure if this meeting is going to happen before the holiday or not. So I'm just wondering.
Why don't we go ahead for anybody that's interested? Why don't you go ahead and put a note in the chat, and we'll capture it there, and then we'll know who to follow up with.
Yeah, but Jason, I think we need to get scheduled as soon as we can.
Okay.
That sounds great, and I'm happy to see a number of folks signing up for that. I know it's not the sexiest part of the work, but it is important. So glad to see that folks are up for that.
Right.
It's the one that we've most consistently come back around to. So it's a really important piece of this.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, I think we might have reached our capacity today for discussion, but it's been really good. And so I appreciate everybody's kind of thoughtfulness and candor throughout. This has been a good process. I think clearly we still have some work to do between now and the end of the year and continuing after that, which is a good thing. That's why we're having this discussion. So we'll follow up for those that are interested about kind of the small group meeting. Again, once everybody's had a chance to review the report in more depth, feel free to share additional comments in writing. You can do that to me over email or to Terry or any one of our committee chairs. And we'll be happy to review that and incorporate feedback to the extent that we can. And we'll just we'll keep working through it. Before we kind of move to adjourn, any additional thoughts that anyone wants to share before we conclude today? Okay,
Hey, Drew, sorry, a very basic comment or question. I don't, not in the interest of overcomplicating things, but I'm wondering if there's any value in trying to consolidate comments among the subcommittees before sharing them to you. Defer to you on that, since I think you're the one who's going to be kind of herding all the cats together. But just a thought.
Yeah, no, that's a great suggestion, Patrick. I mean, I'm happy to do it, but I think that is a good suggestion. So I guess we'll make the request now. If things are sent to me directly, we'll be sure not to miss them. But that's a good suggestion. So we'll make the suggestion now that to the extent you have comments, filter them through the chairs of your respective subcommittees. Thank you. And I haven't been able to closely track all of the chat comments. Just wanted to ask, Lisa, did you see any comments from any members of the public today that we wanted to acknowledge or address?
No, we've gotten no questions and no comments from the public.
Okay. I just wanted to note that. Okay. So if nothing further, we will move to adjourn.
Good night, everyone.
It was an excellent meeting.
Yeah.
And thanks again, everyone. Thank you, Madam.
Thanks, everyone.
Looking forward to working with you.
Hi, thanks.
Everybody.